The brass doorknob turned without a sound, and Samuel Ashford stepped into the saloon expecting darkness and silence, but instead found lamplight spilling across floorboards still wet from scrubbing, and a woman on her hands and knees working a brush in desperate circles that spoke of something more than cleanliness. Her dark hair had escaped its pins hours ago, falling in damp strands against her neck, and her dress was soaked through at the knees where she knelt in her own wash water. The clock on the wall read midnight, and Samuel had only returned because he had forgotten his rifle after the card game. But now, he stood frozen in the doorway watching this woman attack the floor as if she could wash away more than whiskey stains and tobacco juice. "Madam," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She jerked upright so fast the brush clattered from her hand, spinning across the wet boards. Her eyes were red-rimmed and enormous in a face gone pale with exhaustion, and Samuel saw her hands were raw and bleeding in places where the lye soap had eaten through her skin. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with fine features that suggested she had not been born to this kind of work, and the fear that flashed across her face told him she expected trouble even at this hour. "I did not mean to disturb anyone," she said, her voice hoarse and trembling slightly. "Mr. Garrett said the floor had to be spotless by morning, or I would lose my position, and I have been scrubbing since the last patron left at 11. But there was a fight earlier, and someone spilled an entire bottle of whiskey, and the stain will not come up no matter what I do." Samuel glanced at the floor she had been attacking. The boards gleamed in the lamplight, cleaner than he had ever seen them in the 3 months since he had been coming to this saloon in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Whatever stain she was worried about had long since disappeared, if it had ever really been visible at all. "It is clean enough," he said firmly, crossing the room and gently taking the brush from where she had dropped it. "Come get some rest." She stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "But Mr. Garrett said—" "Garrett is probably passed out drunk in his room upstairs," Samuel interrupted. "And even if he were not, he would have to be blind not to see you have done a fine job. When did you last sleep?" The question seemed to confuse her. She blinked slowly, swaying slightly on her knees. Yesterday morning, I think, before the lunch service. But there was so much to do, and then the evening crowd came in, and then this happened, and I cannot lose this position. I have nowhere else to go." The desperation in her voice cut through Samuel like a blade. He set the brush down and offered her his hand. "Come on. You are going to collapse if you keep this up, and then you will be no good to anyone." She looked at his hand as if it might bite her, but after a long moment she placed her raw, reddened fingers in his palm and let him help her to her feet. She wobbled immediately, and Samuel steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Up close, he could see the delicate bone structure of her face, the exhaustion that had carved shadows beneath her eyes, and something else, a bruise on her cheekbone that was a few days old and fading to yellow. "What is your name?" he asked. Faye Hartwell." "Well, Miss Hartwell, I am Samuel Ashford, and I am going to make sure you get some rest. Where do you sleep?" She gestured vaguely toward the back of the building. "There is a storage room behind the kitchen. Mr. Garrett lets me sleep there in exchange for taking care of the cleaning and helping with the cooking." Samuel had seen storage rooms in places like this. They were usually cramped, windowless spaces filled with crates and barrels, barely fit for storing supplies, let alone housing a human being. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "Show me." Faye led him through the empty saloon, past the bar with its rows of bottles catching the lamplight, through the kitchen that still smelled of fried meat and onions, to a narrow door at the very back. She pushed it open, and Samuel had to duck his head to follow her inside. The space was exactly as bad as he had imagined, perhaps 6 feet by 8 feet, with crates stacked along one wall and a thin blanket spread on the floor in the only clear space. No pillow, no mattress, nothing but hard boards and a blanket that had more holes than fabric. "Jesus Christ," Samuel muttered. Faye turned defensive immediately. "It is better than sleeping outside. I have done that too, and I can tell you this is preferable. How long have you been in Truth or Consequences? 3 weeks. I came on the stagecoach from Santa Fe with the last money I had. My father died 6 months ago, and the bank took our house for his debts. I had been working as a seamstress, but the woman who owned the shop said she could not afford to keep me on anymore. I heard there was work out here, in the territories, for people willing to do what needed doing." She said it matter-of-factly, but Samuel heard the story beneath the words: the slow collapse of a life, the desperate flight west, the grinding poverty that had brought her to scrubbing saloon floors at midnight for a man like Garrett, who clearly did not give a damn whether she lived or died. "You should not be sleeping in here," Samuel said. "I have no other choice. There are boarding houses in town. That cost money I do not have. Mr. Garrett pays me $1 a week plus room and board, and I have to send half of that back to Santa Fe because my younger sister is still there living with our aunt. And my aunt says if I do not contribute, she will put my sister out on the street." Samuel felt something hot and angry coil in his chest. $1 a week was criminal wages even for this kind of work, and if Faye was sending half of that away, she was living on 50 cents a week, not enough to eat properly, let alone find decent lodging. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the cleanest crate. "I really should finish the floor is finished. Sit down before you fall down." Faye sank onto the crate with a sigh that seemed to come from the very center of her bones. Samuel crouched in front of her and took one of her hands, turning it palm up to examine the raw, cracked skin. She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "You need salve on these or they will get infected. I have some lard in the kitchen I have been using. Lard is not medicine. Tomorrow I will bring you proper salve from the doctor. I cannot afford, I am not asking you to pay for it." Faye stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face as if trying to determine what he wanted from her. Samuel had seen that look before, on the faces of women who had learned that men did not offer help without expecting something in return. It made him sick to think she believed he was that kind of man, but he could not blame her for the assumption. In a place like this, it was probably the safest one to make. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked quietly. "Because you look like you could use some kindness," Samuel said simply. "And because no one should be working themselves to death for a man like Garrett. You know him. I've played cards here a few times. He cheats, but not well enough that it is worth calling him out. Mostly I know his type, the kind of man who sees people like you as something to be used up and thrown away." Faye's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back fiercely. "I am trying so hard. I know this is not much, but it is all I have, and if I lose this position, I do not know what I will do. There are not many places that will hire a woman alone with no references and no skills except needlework and cleaning." Samuel made a decision in that moment, one that would change both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. "You are not going to lose this position, and tomorrow we are going to talk about getting you a better one. There are no better positions in Truth or Consequences. I asked everywhere when I first arrived. Then we will make one." Before Faye could ask what he meant, Samuel stood and pulled off his coat. He draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, hanging nearly to her knees, and then grabbed the cleanest of the blankets from a nearby crate. "Get some sleep," he said. "I am going to stay in the saloon until morning to make sure Garrett does not bother you when he wakes up. You cannot do that. You must have somewhere else to be. I have a room at the boarding house 2 streets over, and nothing that cannot wait until tomorrow. Sleep, Miss Hartwell. Things will look different in the morning. He did not wait for her to argue further. He left the storage room, closing the door gently behind him, and went back out into the saloon. His forgotten rifle still leaned against the wall where he had left it. Samuel picked it up and settled into a chair at one of the tables, positioning himself where he could see both the front door and the stairs leading up to the rooms on the second floor. The night stretched long and quiet around him. Samuel had always been comfortable with silence. It was one of the things he had learned during the war, when he had spent long hours on watch while other men slept. That had been nearly 12 years ago now, back in 1873, when he had been just 18 and stupid enough to think fighting for something meant it would turn out right. He had learned differently, had learned that the world was harder and crueler than he had imagined. But he had also learned that sometimes the best thing a man could do was stand between the cruelty and someone who could not defend themselves. Dawn came slowly, pale light creeping through the saloon windows and turning the dust motes into drifting gold. Samuel heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Garrett descending, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a face like a worn saddle and eyes that were already calculating even though he had just woken up. "What are you doing here, Ashford?" Garrett demanded. "I left my rifle last night. Came back to get it and decided to wait for morning rather than stumbling around in the dark." Garrett grunted, clearly not entirely believing this but unable to think of a reason to challenge it. "Well, you might as well clear out now. I've got a business to run." "About that," Samuel said, standing and slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "I noticed Miss Hartwell was still scrubbing your floors past midnight. That seems excessive." "That is none of your concern. She works for me, and I will run my establishment as I see fit." $1 a week is criminal wages. Garrett's expression turned ugly. "She is lucky to have that. There are plenty of other girls who would take her place for less." "Then why not hire them?" "Because she is good at the work and does not complain." "Now get out of my saloon before I have you thrown out." Samuel considered pointing out that Garrett would have a hard time throwing him anywhere. Samuel had 4 inches of height on the older man and 30 pounds of muscle, but starting a fight would only make things worse for Faye. So instead, he nodded politely and headed for the door, already planning his next move. Truth or Consequences was not a large town, but it had grown considerably in the past few years, thanks to the nearby hot springs and the railroad that had pushed through 2 years earlier. Samuel had been working as a cattle buyer, traveling between the ranches in the surrounding territory and arranging sales to the eastern markets. It was decent money and steady work, and it had allowed him to save up a considerable sum over the past 5 years. He had been thinking about settling down, maybe buying his own ranch, but those plans had been vague and distant. Now, walking through the early morning streets, he found himself thinking about them with new urgency. He stopped first at the doctor's office. Doc Morrison was an early riser, already awake and drinking coffee in his front room when Samuel knocked. "Ashford," the doc said, opening the door. "What brings you around at this hour? You are not injured, are you?" "I need some salve for burns and raw skin. And maybe something for exhaustion and poor nutrition." Doc Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Who is this for?" "A woman who has been working herself half to death for John Garrett." The doctor's expression soured. "Garrett is a bastard. I have treated 2 girls who worked for him before. One had a broken arm he claimed she got from falling down the stairs, though I would bet money he pushed her, and the other had consumption, and he threw her out on the street when she could not work anymore." "What is this one suffering from?" "Raw hands from lye soap. exhaustion from working all hours and probably not eating enough. Doc Morrison disappeared into his office and returned a few minutes later with a jar of yellow salve and a bottle of dark liquid. The salve is for her hands. She should apply it 3 times a day and wrap them in clean cloth if possible. The tonic is for building up the blood. It has got iron and some other things that will help if she is undernourished. 1 spoonful in the morning and 1 at night. What do I owe you? Nothing. Consider it my contribution to making Garrett's life more difficult. Samuel smiled and took the medicines. His next stop was the general store, which would not open for another hour. So he went to the boarding house where he rented a room and cleaned up, washing the night's vigil from his face and changing into fresh clothes. By the time he returned to the center of town, the general store was opening its doors. Mrs. Chen, who ran the store with her husband, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Ashford, what can I do for you today? I need some supplies." Clean cloth for bandages, some good soap that is not full of lye, food that can be prepared quickly, crackers, cheese, dried fruit, canned goods, and a decent pillow if you have one. Mrs. Chen began pulling items from the shelves, piling them on the counter. "Are you finally fixing up that room of yours? I told you the boarding house provides linens. These are not for me. They are for someone who needs them more." The older woman gave him a knowing look but did not press for details. Samuel paid for everything and carried the bundles back to the saloon. It was still early, not yet 8 in the morning, but the door was unlocked. He pushed inside and found Faye in the kitchen, standing over the stove with her raw hands wrapped in strips of cloth that looked like they had been torn from her petticoat. She was frying eggs and bacon, moving slowly as if every motion hurt. "Miss Hartwell," Samuel said. She turned, and he saw she had put her hair back up and washed her face, but the exhaustion was still there in the shadows under her eyes and the careful way she held herself. His coat was folded neatly over the back of a chair. "Mr. Ashford, I did not expect to see you again. I told you I would bring medicine." He set down his bundles and pulled out the jar of salve and the tonic. "Doc Morrison said to apply this to your hands 3 times a day and wrap them in clean cloth. I brought some cloth that is better than what you are using now. And you are to take a spoonful of this tonic morning and night." Faye stared at the medicines as if they were treasure. "I cannot accept these. I have no way to pay you back. I do not want payment. I want you to take care of yourself." "Why?" The question burst from her, raw and confused. "Why do you care what happens to me? You do not know me." Samuel set the medicines on the table and met her eyes. "My mother died when I was 15. She had been sick for months, coughing up blood, but my father would not pay for a doctor because he said we could not afford it. I watched her waste away, watched her work herself to death trying to keep the house running even though she could barely stand. When she finally collapsed, my father tried to get the doctor then, but it was too late. She died the next day." He paused, the memory still bitter after all these years. "I swore then that if I ever saw someone else in that situation, someone working themselves to death because they had no other choice, I would do something about it. You remind me of her, that same desperate determination to keep going no matter what it costs." Faye's eyes filled with tears again, and this time she did not try to stop them. They spilled down her cheeks as she sagged against the kitchen table. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I am so tired I can barely think straight and my hands hurt, and I am hungry all the time, but I cannot stop because if I stop I will lose everything. My sister will have nowhere to go, and I will end up dead in a ditch somewhere, and it will all have been for nothing." Samuel wanted to pull her into his arms, to tell her it would be all right, but he sensed she was not ready for that kind of comfort from a man she barely knew. So instead he pulled out a chair and guided her into it, then began unwrapping the makeshift bandages from her hands. The skin beneath was angry and red, cracked and bleeding in places. He applied the salve as gently as he could, trying not to hurt her, then wrapped her hands in the clean cloth he had bought. "There," he said. "Now drink some of this tonic, and then I want you to eat something. Real food, not scraps. Mr. Garrett will be angry if the breakfast is not ready when the boarders come down." "How many boarders?" "4. They rent rooms on the second floor. And what do they usually have for breakfast?" "Eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, coffee, and biscuits if I have time to make them." Samuel glanced at the stove. "You have already started the eggs and bacon. I will help you with the rest." "You cannot. I have cooked for cattle crews plenty of times. I know my way around a kitchen well enough to fry potatoes and make coffee." Before Faye could protest further, Samuel rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He found potatoes in the pantry and began slicing them, his knife moving with practiced efficiency. Faye watched him for a moment, then slowly got up and began measuring out coffee. They worked in silence, a strange but comfortable partnership, until the smell of food began to fill the kitchen. The boarders came down one by one, rough-looking men who worked on the railroad or in the nearby mines. They eyed Samuel curiously but did not ask questions, too interested in their food to care who had helped cook it. Garrett appeared last, scowling when he saw Samuel in the kitchen. "What the hell are you doing back here, Ashford? Helping with breakfast?" "Miss Hartwell injured her hands on your lye soap and needed assistance." Garrett's scowl deepened, but he could not complain without admitting that he had driven Faye to injure herself. He grabbed a plate and sat down at the table, eating in angry silence while Samuel finished cleaning up the kitchen. When the meal was done and the boarders had left for their work, Samuel finally turned to Garrett. "I would like to speak with you about Miss Hartwell's employment." "There is nothing to speak about. She works for me, and that is the end of it." "I would like to buy out her contract." Garrett's eyes sharpened with interest. "She does not have a contract. Then I would like to hire her myself." "For what purpose?" The way Garrett said it made the implication clear, and Samuel felt his temper rise. "I am buying the old Carter building on the edge of town," Samuel said, improvising rapidly. "I am going to turn it into a boarding house, and I need someone to run it. Miss Hartwell has experience in cooking and cleaning, and I am prepared to offer her fair wages and proper living quarters." This was news to Samuel as much as anyone else. He had not thought about buying the Carter building until the words came out of his mouth. But once he said them, he realized it made sense. The building had been sitting empty for 6 months since Old Man Carter had died without heirs. It was a solid structure, large enough to house 8 or 10 boarders comfortably, and it was located near the railroad station where travelers often needed a place to stay. Garrett was looking at him suspiciously. "You are lying. You have not bought anything." "I am going to the land office this morning to make an offer. If my offer is accepted, I will need staff immediately. Miss Hartwell is qualified, and I am prepared to pay her $5 a week plus room and board." Faye gasped audibly at the mention of $5 a week, 5 times what Garrett was paying her. Garrett heard it too, and his face darkened. "You are trying to steal my help. I am offering employment to someone who is free to accept or decline as she chooses." "Miss Hartwell, would you be interested in the position I just described?" Faye looked between Samuel and Garrett, fear and hope warring on her face. Yes, I would be very interested." "Then it is settled. I will go to the land office now, and if everything proceeds as planned, you can begin your new position as soon as the paperwork is complete." Garrett stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You cannot just walk in here and take her. I need her." "You need someone to exploit," Samuel said flatly. Miss Hartwell deserves better, and now she is going to get it. If you try to prevent her from leaving, I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly how you have been treating her, and I will encourage all your current boarders to find lodging elsewhere. I know most of them personally from the cattle yards, and they will listen to me." It was a bluff, but Garrett did not know that. The older man's face went through several shades of red before he finally spat on the floor and stormed out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the stairs as he went back up to his room. Faye was staring at Samuel with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "Did you really just do that? Did you really just buy a building so you could hire me away from him?" "I have not bought it yet," Samuel admitted, "but I am going to. I have been thinking about settling down and starting a business, and a boarding house near the railroad station makes good sense. I meant what I said about needing someone to run it, and you clearly have the skills. But $5 a week, that is so much money. How will you afford to pay me that? A good boarding house can bring in $50 to $100 a week if it is run properly. $5 for a manager is reasonable. Plus, if you are living on the premises, you will not have to worry about rent or food, so you should be able to save most of your wages or send more to your sister." Faye pressed her bandaged hands to her face, and her shoulders began to shake. For a moment, Samuel thought she was crying, but then he realized she was laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that spoke of relief and exhaustion and the sudden release of weeks of crushing pressure. "I cannot believe this is happening," she said through her laughter. "Yesterday I was scrubbing floors at midnight thinking I was going to collapse and die, and today you are offering me a job that will pay me more money than I have ever made in my life. Are you real? Or did I finally collapse from exhaustion and this is all a dream?" "I am real," Samuel said gently. "And so is the offer. Now I am going to the land office. You should rest today if Garrett allows it and keep applying that salve to your hands. I will come back this evening and let you know how things went." "Thank you," Faye whispered. "Thank you so much, Mr. Ashford. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You can start by calling me Samuel. If we are going to be working together, we should dispense with the formalities. Then you should call me Faye." Samuel smiled and tipped his hat to her, then headed out into the bright morning sunshine. His heart was pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had just committed himself to buying a building and starting a business on the spur of the moment, all because he could not stand to see a woman destroying herself for a man like Garrett. It was reckless and impulsive, but it also felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in a long time. The land office was a small building near the courthouse, presided over by a bored-looking clerk named Thompson. Samuel explained what he wanted, and Thompson pulled out a thick ledger and began flipping through pages. "The Carter Building," Thompson mused. "That has been sitting empty for a while. The town has been trying to sell it to cover the back taxes. They are asking $300. Samuel did some quick mental calculations. He had nearly $600 saved up from his years of working as a cattle buyer. $300 for the building would leave him $300 for renovations and supplies, and to cover expenses until the boarding house started bringing in income. It would be tight, but it was doable. "I will take it," Samuel said. Thompson raised his eyebrows. "Just like that. You do not want to look at the property first. It might need significant repairs." "I have seen the building. It is solid. Draw up the paperwork." 2 hours later, Samuel walked out of the land office as the owner of a 2-story building with 12 rooms, a full kitchen, a dining area, and a small office on the ground floor. His savings had been cut in half, but he felt a strange sense of exhilaration as he headed over to the building to inspect his new property. The Carter Building was larger than he remembered, with a wide front porch and tall windows that let in plenty of light. The inside was dusty and filled with old furniture covered in sheets, but the structure was sound. The roof looked good, the floors were solid, and the kitchen had a large cast-iron stove that appeared to be in working order. It would need cleaning and some minor repairs, but Samuel thought they could have it ready to open for business within 2 weeks if they worked hard. He spent the rest of the day making lists of what needed to be done and what supplies they would need. He bought cleaning supplies, hired a carpenter to fix some loose boards on the porch, and arranged for a load of firewood to be delivered. By the time evening rolled around, he was exhausted but satisfied. He returned to the saloon as the sun was setting, finding it already filling up with the evening crowd. Faye was behind the bar serving drinks, her hands still bandaged but moving competently as she poured whiskey and beer. She saw him come in and her face lit up, and Samuel felt something warm unfold in his chest at that smile. He waited until she had a break, then motioned her over to a quiet corner. "I bought the building," he said without preamble. Faye's hands flew to her mouth. "You really did it." "I really did. It needs work, but it is in good shape overall. I think we can have it ready to open in 2 weeks if you are willing to help with the cleaning and organizing." "Of course I am willing. When can I start?" "Tomorrow if you want, but you will need to give Garrett notice." Faye glanced toward the bar where Garrett was watching them with a sour expression. "I do not think he will care about notice. He will probably tell me to leave immediately once I tell him I am quitting." "You want me to be there when you tell him?" "No, this is something I need to do myself." She squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. "But I would appreciate it if you could wait nearby in case he tries to refuse me my wages. I will be right here." Faye walked over to where Garrett stood and spoke to him in a low voice. Samuel could not hear what she said, but he saw Garrett's face turn purple with rage. The older man started to shout, and the noise in the saloon died down as people turned to watch. Samuel moved closer, ready to intervene. "You ungrateful little witch," Garrett was snarling. "I gave you a job when no one else would, and this is how you repay me. By running off with the first man who shows you attention." "You gave me a job that was killing me," Faye said, her voice shaking but determined. "You paid me starvation wages and made me sleep in a storage room and work until I could barely stand. Mr. Ashford is offering me honest work for fair pay, and I am accepting his offer. Now please give me the wages you owe me for this week and I will be on my way." "You are not owed anything. You are leaving in the middle of your employment. I worked 5 days this week. You owe me 5/7 of a dollar. You are not getting a cent from me." Samuel stepped forward. "Actually, she is." "You are going to pay her exactly what you owe her, Garrett, or I am going to make your life very difficult. You cannot threaten me in my own establishment." "I am not threatening. I am promising. Pay her." The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Garrett was the first to look away. He reached into his cash box and pulled out a handful of coins, throwing them on the bar with deliberate contempt. "There. Now get out, both of you." Faye gathered up the coins with her bandaged hands, her face burning with humiliation. Samuel offered her his arm and she took it gratefully, letting him lead her out of the saloon and into the evening air. Behind them, the noise of the saloon gradually resumed, though Samuel could feel eyes following them through the window. "I am sorry you had to see that," Faye said quietly once they were outside. "You have nothing to apologize for. Garrett is a small, mean man who hates seeing anyone escape his control. You handled yourself well." "I was shaking the entire time. Being brave does not mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done, even when you are scared." They walked in silence for a few moments. The night was warm and clear, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. truth or consequences was settling into its evening rhythms, lamplight glowing in windows and the sound of music drifting from various establishments. "Where will you stay tonight?" Samuel asked, suddenly realizing that Faye no longer had a place to sleep. I had not thought that far ahead. Faye looked stricken. "I cannot go back to the saloon, and I do not have enough money for a room at the boarding house. You can stay at the new building. It is not fancy, but there are beds with actual mattresses, and it is clean and safe. I will stay there too, in one of the other rooms, so you will not be alone in an unfamiliar place." Faye hesitated, and Samuel saw the calculation in her eyes again, trying to figure out what he wanted from her, whether this kindness came with a price. "I promise I am not going to bother you," Samuel said gently. "You will have your own room with a lock on the door, and I will be down the hall. We are going to be working together, and that means you need to be able to trust me. I am not going to do anything to violate that trust." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Faye nodded. "All right. Thank you, Samuel." They walked to the Carter building, Faye's new home. Samuel reminded himself, and he lit the lamps so she could see inside. In the lamplight, with its dusty furniture and echoing rooms, the building looked both larger and more daunting than it had during the day. "This is going to be a lot of work," Faye said, looking around with wide eyes. "It is, but I think it will be worth it. Come on, let me show you the upstairs." He led her up the staircase to the second floor, where the bedroom doors stood open. Most of the rooms were empty except for iron bed frames, but two of them had actual beds with mattresses that looked to be in decent condition. Samuel checked them both, trying to determine which was better. "This one," he said, opening the door to a room at the front of the building. It had a large window that looked out over the street, a bed with a reasonably clean mattress, a small dresser, and even a mirror on the wall. "It is not much, but it is better than a storage room floor." Faye walked into the room slowly, running her bandaged hand over the dresser, looking at her reflection in the mirror. When she turned back to Samuel, her eyes were bright with tears. "This is the nicest room I have had in months," she said, "since before my father died. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you for everything you have done for me today. I still cannot quite believe it is real." "It is real," Samuel assured her. "Now I am going to go get some food and bring it back. We both need to eat, and then you need to sleep. Tomorrow we will start making lists and getting this place ready to open." He left before she could protest, and returned 20 minutes later with meat pies from the bakery and 2 bottles of beer. They sat on the front porch steps and ate in comfortable silence, too hungry and tired for much conversation. When they finished, Samuel showed Faye how the lock on her door worked and then retreated to the room he had chosen for himself at the other end of the hall. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the building settling around him and thinking about the woman sleeping down the hall. He barely knew her, and yet he had appended his entire life to help her. It was not like him to be so impulsive. He was usually careful, measured, the kind of man who thought things through before acting. But there had been something about finding Faye scrubbing that floor at midnight, something about the desperate determination in her movements and the raw wounds on her hands that had cut through all his careful defenses and demanded action. He told himself it was just compassion, just the memory of his mother and his promise to help people in similar situations. But lying there in the dark, he admitted there was more to it than that. Faye was beautiful, even exhausted and worn down by Garrett's mistreatment. More than that, she had a strength to her that drew him like iron to a lodestone. She had kept going when most people would have given up, had fought for dignity in circumstances that offered none, and she had done it all alone. Samuel had been alone for a long time too. After his mother's death, He had left home at 16 and spent years drifting, fighting in small skirmishes, working cattle, taking any job that kept him moving. He had told himself he preferred it that way, that he did not need roots or connections. But tonight, lying in this empty building with Faye sleeping down the hall, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he could imagine staying in one place, building something lasting, maybe even building a life with someone. It was too soon to think about that, he told himself firmly. He had known Faye for less than a day. Whatever connection he felt was probably just the intensity of the situation, the intimacy that came from helping someone in desperate need. He needed to focus on getting the boarding house running and making sure Faye was safe and secure. Anything else could wait. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, the last thought in his mind was of her smile when he had told her about buying the building, and the way something in his chest had warmed at that smile. The next morning, Samuel woke to find sunlight streaming through his window and the sound of movement downstairs. He dressed quickly and went down to find Faye already in the kitchen, examining the stove with a critical eye. She had traded her worn dress for one that was slightly less worn, and she had rewrapped her hands in fresh bandages. "You are up early," Samuel said. "I am used to early hours. Besides, I wanted to see what we are working with here." She gestured around the kitchen. "The stove is good, better than the one at the saloon. We will need to clean the flue and make sure all the burners work properly, but it should serve us well. The pantry is a good size, and there is even a root cellar for cold storage. If we can get enough dishes and cookware, I think I can feed 10 or 12 people without any trouble." Samuel listened as she continued, cataloging what they had and what they would need, her voice growing more animated as she spoke. This was clearly a woman who knew her business, and Samuel felt his confidence in his impulsive decision growing. Faye might have been ground down by her circumstances, but she had not been broken. Given a fair chance, he suspected she would thrive. They spent that day and the next making lists and cleaning. Samuel hired 2 local boys to help move furniture and scrub floors while he and Faye tackled the detailed work cleaning windows, washing linens, organizing the kitchen. Faye proved to have strong opinions about how things should be arranged, and Samuel was happy to defer to her expertise. This would be her domain, after all, and she needed to be comfortable running it. On the 3rd day, they went to the general store together to buy supplies. Mrs. Chen took one look at them, Samuel with wood shavings in his hair and Faye with her bandaged hands and cleaning apron, and broke into a knowing smile. "So the rumors are true. You really are opening a boarding house." "News travels fast," Samuel said. "In a town this size, news travels before it happens. What do you need?" They spent an hour selecting dishes and cookware, linens and lamps, all the small necessities that turned an empty building into a home. Mrs. Chen gave them a generous discount and threw in a set of curtains for free. "For luck," she said. "I think you two are going to do well." As they walked back to the boarding house laden with purchases, Faye said quietly, "People are talking about us, are they not? Probably. Small town, and we have given them something interesting to talk about. What are they saying?" Samuel considered lying to spare her feelings, but decided she deserved honesty. "They are probably saying I bought you from Garrett, that you are my mistress and the boarding house is just a cover story." He felt Faye stiffen beside him. "And does that bother you? People can say what they like." "I know the truth and so do you. That is what matters. But if people think I am, that we are." Faye trailed off, her face flushed. "Then they will learn differently when they see how we conduct ourselves. You are my business partner and manager, nothing more. Though I hope we are also becoming friends." "I would like that," Faye said softly. "I have not had a friend in a long time." They worked together for another week, falling into an easy rhythm. Samuel handled the structural repairs and heavy lifting while Faye organized the domestic side of things. They took their meals together on the front porch, talking about their plans for the boarding house and gradually sharing more about their pasts. Samuel learned that Faye had grown up in a small town outside Santa Fe, the eldest of 3 children. Her father had been a clerk in a land office, respectable but never prosperous. Her mother had died when Faye was 12, leaving her to help raise her younger brother and sister. The brother had died of fever 2 years ago, and now there was only the sister, Miranda, living with their aunt. "I send her letters every week," Faye said, "telling her about what I am doing and how I am saving money to bring her out here. She is only 15, but she wants to be a teacher. If I can save enough, I can send her to the normal school in Santa Fe and she can get her certificate." "That is a good dream," Samuel said. "What about you? What are your dreams?" Samuel thought about it. "I suppose this is my dream now, building something that lasts, putting down roots. I spent so long moving from place to place that I forgot what it felt like to have a home." "Is that why you helped me? Because you wanted someone to share this dream with?" "Maybe partly. Mostly, I just could not stand seeing you hurt yourself for someone like Garrett." Faye reached across the space between them and laid her bandaged hand on top of his. "I am glad you were there that night. I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not come back for your rifle." Samuel turned his hand over and gently squeezed her fingers, careful of her healing skin. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went deeper than gratitude or partnership. He saw it reflected in Faye's eyes, the same tentative hope and fear that he felt himself. They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked, neither of them speaking. Then Faye pulled back gently, a small smile on her face. "We should probably finish painting the sign before it gets too dark." The sign had been Samuel's idea, a large board that would hang over the front porch, proclaiming the establishment as Hartwell House. He had suggested naming it after Faye, and she had been so touched she had cried. Now they worked together to paint the letters, arguing amiably about the best shade of blue for the background. 2 days later, Hartwell House opened for business. Samuel had spread the word through his contacts at the cattle yards and the railroad, and they had 3 boarders signed up. Before they even opened the doors, 2 railroad workers and a traveling salesman. Faye cooked a feast for their first dinner, serving roast chicken and potatoes and apple pie, and the 3 men ate until they could barely move. "Best meal I have had since I left home," one of the railroad workers declared. "If the food is always this good, you are going to have a line out the door." He was not wrong. Within a week, all 12 rooms were full, and Faye was turning people away. They had to start a waiting list, and Samuel began thinking about whether they could expand the building or perhaps buy another property. The money was coming in even faster than he had projected, and after paying expenses and Faye's wages, they were still clearing a solid profit. Faye flourished in the work. With proper rest and regular meals, the shadows disappeared from under her eyes, and color returned to her cheeks. Her hands healed, the raw wounds fading to smooth skin. She moved through the boarding house like a general commanding an army, managing everything from meal planning to laundry schedules with calm efficiency. The boarders adored her, and Samuel often heard them singing her praises as they sat on the porch in the evening. He watched her bloom and felt his own feelings deepening. It was more than attraction now, though God knew she was beautiful. It was admiration for her strength and competence, pleasure in her company, and a bone-deep contentment he felt whenever she was near. He found himself looking for excuses to be in whatever room she was in, to catch her eye and share a smile over some small domestic crisis or triumph. He thought she felt it too. He caught her watching him sometimes, a soft expression on her face that made his heart stutter. She laughed at his jokes, sought his opinion on household matters, and seemed to relax in his presence in a way she did not with others. But neither of them said anything, both cautious about disturbing the harmony they had built. Then one evening about a month after they had opened, Samuel came back from a trip to one of the nearby ranches to find Faye sitting on the front porch steps with a letter in her hands and tears streaming down her face. He was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her. "Faye, what is wrong?" "What happened?" She held out the letter with shaking hands. "It is from my aunt. She says Miranda ran away 2 weeks ago. She left a note saying she could not live there anymore, that our aunt was cruel to her and she was going to find me. But she never arrived, Samuel. She should have been here by now if she left 2 weeks ago, and she is not here and no one knows where she is." Samuel's stomach went cold. A 15-year-old girl traveling alone through the territories, it did not bear thinking about. "Did your aunt contact the law?" "She says she did, but they told her there was nothing they could do. Girls run away all the time, they said. They told her Miranda would probably turn up eventually." Faye's voice broke. "She is only 15, Samuel. She is just a child and she is out there somewhere alone and anything could have happened to her." "We will find her," Samuel said firmly, taking Faye's hands in his. "I promise you we will find her. Do you know what route she would have taken?" "The stage route from Santa Fe to here, I suppose." "That is the most direct way. Then I will ride it and ask at every stage stop in town along the way. Someone must have seen her. I am coming with you. Faye, you need to stay here and run the boarding house. The boarding house can wait. Miranda is my sister. I am coming with you, and that is final." Samuel recognized the steel in her voice and knew there was no point arguing. "All right, we will leave at first light. I will ask Mrs. Chen if she can manage things here while we are gone." They spent the evening preparing for the journey, packing supplies and making arrangements. Mrs. Chen agreed to oversee the boarding house with the help of one of their regular boarders who was between jobs. Samuel checked his rifle and purchased ammunition, trying not to think too hard about why they might need it. They set out as the sun was rising, Samuel on his horse and Faye on a gentle mare he had rented from the livery. The ride to Santa Fe was about 70 miles, normally a 2-day journey on horseback. They would stop at every town and stage station along the way, showing Miranda's description and asking if anyone had seen her. The first day turned up nothing. No one at the stage stops remembered seeing a girl matching Miranda's description, though the station masters pointed out that they saw dozens of travelers every day and could not possibly remember them all. Faye grew more tense with each negative response, her face drawn with worry. They spent the night at a small inn halfway to Santa Fe. Samuel paid for 2 rooms, but he heard Faye pacing in hers late into the night, too worried to sleep. He wanted to go to her to offer comfort, but he was not sure his comfort would be welcome. The easy companionship they had built over the past month felt fragile now, overshadowed by fear for Miranda. The second day brought their first real lead. At a stage stop called Dry Creek, the station master took one look at the description and nodded. "I remember her. Pretty girl, dark hair, about 15. She came through about 10 days ago on the northbound stage." "Was she all right?" Faye asked urgently. "Was she hurt?" "She seemed fine, just tired. She asked about stages going north and west. I told her the next one would not be through for 2 days, and she said she would walk. I tried to tell her it was not safe for a girl alone, but she would not listen." "Which direction did she go?" She was asking about truth or consequences specifically. "I told her she could either wait for the stage or walk northwest and catch the railroad at Ingle. It is about 20 miles from here. If she had any money, she might have taken the train from there. Samuel and Faye thanked the man and immediately set off for Ingle. It was late afternoon by the time they reached the small railroad town, and the station master was just closing up for the night. But he remembered Miranda immediately. Sure, she took the train north about a week ago. Bought a ticket to Truth or Consequences. I remember because she was so young to be traveling alone. I asked if she was meeting family and she said yes, her sister was waiting for her. Relief flooded Faye's face. So she made it to Truth or Consequences, but why did she not come to the boarding house? That was the question that worried Samuel. If Miranda had arrived in Truth or Consequences a week ago, she should have found Faye easily. The town was not large and anyone could have directed her to Hartwell House. The fact that she had not appeared suggested something had gone wrong between the train station and their door. They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard. Samuel could see the fear building in Faye again, and he felt his own worry mounting. A 15-year-old girl alone in Truth or Consequences for a week, he did not want to think about what might have happened. They reached town at dawn, their horses lathered and exhausted. Samuel took Faye straight to the sheriff's office, where Sheriff Morrison was just unlocking the door. "Ashford, Miss Hartwell," the sheriff said in surprise. "What has got you two looking so rattled?" "Faye's sister disappeared," Samuel said rapidly. "She left Santa Fe 2 weeks ago trying to reach Truth or Consequences, and the railroad station master says she arrived here a week ago, but she never came to our place. We need to find her." Morrison's expression turned serious. "Give me a description." Faye described Miranda in detail, 15 years old, dark hair and dark eyes like Faye herself, about 5 feet tall, slender build, wearing a blue dress and carrying a small carpet bag. Morrison listened carefully, then shook his head. "I have not seen anyone matching that description, but I will ask around. You two should get some rest, you look like you rode all night." "We are not resting until we find her," Faye said sharply. They spent the day going door to door, showing Miranda's description to everyone they met. The general store, the bank, the saloons, the boarding houses, everywhere they went, the answer was the same. No one had seen her. By evening, Faye was near collapse, her fear transforming into a kind of numb desperation. Where could she be? She whispered as they sat on the steps of their own boarding house, watching the sun set. If she made it to town, where did she go? Samuel did not have an answer, but he refused to give up. "Tomorrow we will search the outskirts of town." "Maybe she is camping somewhere, waiting to work up the courage to find you." "Why would she need courage? She knows I want her here." "Maybe she is scared you will be angry that she ran away. Or maybe she is ashamed that she did not make it all the way without help." It was a weak theory, but it was all Samuel had. He convinced Faye to eat something and try to rest, though he knew she would not sleep. He did not sleep much either, lying awake and thinking about all the things that could happen to a young girl alone. The next morning they started searching the areas around town, riding out in expanding circles. Samuel asked at the nearby ranches while Faye checked the arroyos and dry creek beds where someone might camp. The day wore on with no results, and Samuel saw the hope fading from Faye's eyes. Then, as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, they heard a sound, a faint cry coming from somewhere off the main road. Samuel and Faye looked at each other and then urged their horses toward the sound. They found her in a shallow ravine about a mile from town, a slender girl huddled under a scraggly tree with her carpet bag clutched to her chest. "Miranda!" Faye screamed, practically falling off her horse in her haste to reach her sister. The girl looked up, and Samuel saw the family resemblance immediately, the same dark eyes and fine features, though where Faye's face showed strength, Miranda showed fear and exhaustion. She was filthy and sunburned, her dress torn in several places, and when Faye reached her she burst into tears. "I am sorry," Miranda sobbed as Faye held her. "I am so sorry, Faye. I tried to find you, but I got lost. And then I was too scared to ask for help because I thought people would send me back to Aunt Catherine, and I could not go back there. I could not. She was so mean and she said terrible things and I just wanted to be with you." "SHH, it is all right," Faye murmured, rocking her sister. "You are safe now, I have got you." Samuel dismounted and approached carefully. "Miranda, my name is Samuel. I am a friend of your sister's. Can you stand? We need to get you back to town where it is safe." Miranda looked at him with enormous, frightened eyes, but she nodded and let him help her to her feet. She was shaky from hunger and exposure, so Samuel lifted her onto his horse and then mounted behind her to keep her steady. Faye rode beside them, never taking her eyes off her sister. Back at the boarding house, Faye immediately took charge. She got Miranda into a hot bath, washed and bandaged her cuts and scrapes, and fed her hot soup until the girl's color started to return. Samuel stayed downstairs, explaining the situation to their boarders and asking them to keep the noise down so Miranda could rest. Later that evening, after Miranda had fallen asleep in Faye's bed, Faye came downstairs and found Samuel in the kitchen. Without a word, she walked straight into his arms and Samuel held her as she finally let herself fall apart, crying with relief and residual fear. "We found her," she kept saying. "We found her. Thank God we found her. You are a good sister," Samuel said softly. "She is lucky to have you." Faye pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face wet with tears. "I could not have found her without you. You dropped everything to help me search, and you never gave up even when it seemed hopeless. Why do you keep doing these things for me, Samuel?" He could have deflected the question, could have given some easy answer about friendship or decency. But standing there with Faye in his arms, her sister safe upstairs, Samuel felt something break open inside him. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since the night I found you scrubbing that floor. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you fight for the people you care about. I love working beside you every day and hearing your laugh when something goes right. I love you, Faye, and I could not stand by and watch you suffer any more than I could stop breathing." Faye stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Then slowly, wonderingly, she reached up and touched his face. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been afraid to say it because everything happened so fast and I did not want to presume, but I have loved you for weeks now. You saved me, Samuel. You gave me back my life and my dignity, and then you gave me a home and work I am proud of, and now you have given me back my sister. How could I not love you?" Samuel bent his head and kissed her, a gentle meeting of lips that tasted of salt from her tears. Faye made a small sound in her throat and wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with a fierce tenderness that made his heart soar. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet kitchen while upstairs Miranda slept the sleep of the safe and found. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "What happens now?" Faye asked. "Now we keep doing what we have been doing," Samuel said. "We run this boarding house together, we take care of Miranda, and we build the life we both want. And when enough time has passed that people will not say we are rushing things, I am going to ask you to marry me." "You do not have to wait," Faye said. "I already know my answer will be yes. Even so, I want to do this properly. I want to court you the right way, let Miranda see that I respect you and intend to treat you well. She has been through enough upheaval. She needs to see stability." Faye smiled and kissed him again, soft and sweet. "You are a good man, Samuel Ashford. I am very lucky I was scrubbing that floor the night you came back for your rifle. I am the lucky one," Samuel said. "I thought I was just coming back for a rifle, and instead I found everything I had been searching for without knowing it." They stood together in the kitchen, arms around each other, and through the window Samuel could see the lights of truth or consequences twinkling in the darkness. This strange little town in the New Mexico territory had given him a home and a purpose, and a love he had never expected to find. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. In the days that followed, Miranda slowly came back to life under Faye's care. She was a quiet girl, more reserved than her sister, but she had a gentle humor that emerged as she felt safer. She told them about life with their aunt, the constant criticism. The way Aunt Catherine had threatened to throw her out if she was not more useful. The final explosion when Miranda had spilled tea on an expensive tablecloth, and her aunt had struck her across the face. "That is when I knew I had to leave," Miranda said quietly. "I was so afraid of what might happen, but I was more afraid of staying." "You were very brave," Samuel told her. "It takes courage to leave a bad situation even when you do not know what comes next." Miranda looked at him shyly. "Faye says you are the one who helped her leave her bad situation, that you saved her from Mr. Garrett." "I did not save her. She saved herself by having the courage to accept help when it was offered." "That is not how Faye tells it. She says you are a hero." Samuel felt his face heat, and Faye laughed from across the room. "I never said hero. I said he was kind and decent and brave, though hero is not far off." As the weeks passed, Miranda settled into life at the boarding house. She helped with the cooking and cleaning, and in the evenings Faye tutored her in reading and mathematics, keeping alive Miranda's dream of becoming a teacher. The boarders adopted her as a kind of mascot, treating her with avuncular kindness and bringing her small gifts from their travels. Samuel courted Faye properly, taking her on walks along the river on her afternoons off, bringing her flowers from the Mexican woman who sold them in the market, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings, and talking about their dreams for the future. They were careful to be circumspect in front of Miranda and the boarders, but everyone in the boarding house knew what was developing between them, and everyone approved. 3 months after they found Miranda, on a cool October evening with the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Samuel took Faye up to the roof of the boarding house, where they could see the whole town spread out below them. He had prepared a picnic, complete with wine he had ordered specially from Santa Fe, and they sat together watching the light fade from the sky. "Faye," Samuel said when the first stars started to appear, "these past few months have been the happiest of my life. Every day I wake up grateful that I came back to that saloon that night and found you. You have made me understand what it means to have a home, to have someone to build a life with. I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I am not a rich man, and this is not a fancy ring, but it is real and it is honest, like my feelings for you. Will you marry me, Faye Hartwell? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Faye's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I would marry you if you had no ring at all, because you have already given me everything that matters: safety and respect and love and a home. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger and then kissed her as the stars wheeled overhead and the town below them settled into night. When they finally went back downstairs, they found Miranda waiting with a knowing smile. "You said yes, did you not?" she asked Faye. "How did you know he was going to ask?" "Because he asked me for permission last week. He said it would not be right to marry you without making sure I was comfortable with him becoming part of our family." Faye turned to Samuel, her expression soft. You asked my sister for permission. She is the only family you have. Her opinion matters. Faye pulled him into a fierce hug. I love you so much. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Presbyterian church with half the town in attendance. Faye wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Miranda stood up with her as maid of honor. One of the railroad workers who boarded with them stood up for Samuel, and Sheriff Morrison gave Faye away since she had no male relatives present. The boarding house residents threw them a reception that lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing in the street outside. Samuel danced with his bride under the starlight, and when he looked at her face radiant with happiness, free of the fear and exhaustion that had marked her the night they met, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. "What are you thinking?" Faye asked, seeing his expression. "I am thinking about how different things could have been. If I had not forgotten my rifle that night, if I had come back 10 minutes later and you had already finished cleaning, if I had minded my own business and walked away. But you did not. You came back at exactly the right moment and you did not walk away. That is what matters." "I used to think my life was fine the way it was," Samuel said. "Moving from place to place, working different jobs, never settling down. I thought I did not need anything more than that. But I was wrong. I was lonely and did not even know it. You showed me what I was missing." "We saved each other," Faye said softly. "You pulled me out of a situation that was destroying me, and I gave you a reason to stop running and build something real. We are better together than we ever could have been apart." They kissed as their friends and neighbors cheered, and Samuel knew she was right. They had saved each other, and in doing so they had built something neither of them could have built alone. The boarding house continued to thrive. They hired a local woman to help with the cooking and cleaning, freeing up Faye to focus on the business side of things. She proved to have a natural head for numbers and management, and under her guidance, Hartwell House became known as the best boarding house in Truth or Consequences. They were full most of the time, with a waiting list that stretched weeks into the future. Samuel continued to work as a cattle buyer, but now he came home every night to a wife and a home. He taught Miranda to ride and shoot, skills she would need if she was going to live in the territories. The girl blossomed under his attention, losing the fearful demeanor she had carried from her aunt's house and becoming confident and cheerful. A year after their marriage, Faye told Samuel she was pregnant. He was overjoyed, though nervous about becoming a father. "What if I am no good at it?" he asked. "You have been wonderful with Miranda," Faye pointed out. "You are patient and kind and you listen. Those are the most important things." Their son was born in May of 1886, a healthy baby boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas, after Samuel's father who had died the year before, finally reconciling with his son after years of estrangement. Samuel held his son for the first time and felt something fierce and protective surge through him, a determination to give this child everything he had not had himself, to build a life stable and secure and full of love. Miranda, now 17 and studying for her teaching certificate through a correspondence course, doted on her nephew. She would sit for hours rocking him and singing to him, and Thomas seemed to respond to her voice with particular delight. Watching the two of them together, Samuel thought about how different Miranda's life might have been if they had not found her that day in the ravine, and he was grateful all over again for the chain of chances that had brought them all together. 2 years later, Faye gave birth to twin girls, Emily and Grace. The boarding house became a chaos of children and boarders, with someone always needing something and the sounds of babies crying and children laughing filling the halls. Samuel loved every minute of it. He had gone from being alone in the world to being surrounded by family, and the fullness of it still amazed him sometimes. Miranda graduated with her teaching certificate when she was 19 and was immediately hired to teach at the new school that had opened in Truth or Consequences. She moved into a small house near the school but came to dinner at the boarding house several times a week, and she was always willing to watch her nieces and nephew when Samuel and Faye needed time alone. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Faye back up to the roof of the boarding house where he had proposed. They sat together looking out over the town, now grown larger and more prosperous than it had been when they first arrived. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked. "Giving up the chance to live somewhere easier, somewhere with less dust and more civilization?" Faye laughed and took his hand. "Never. This place gave me back my life. It gave me you and our children and a home I am proud of. Why would I regret any of that?" "Sometimes I think about how young you were when all this started. You were only 22 and you had been through so much. You could have chosen a different path." "I chose the path that led to you," Faye said simply. "That was the right path." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Finally, Faye said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first night, when you found me scrubbing the floor? I said it was clean enough and you should come get some rest." "You gave me permission to stop," Faye said thoughtfully. "That is what it really was. I had been pushing myself so hard for so long, afraid that if I stopped even for a moment everything would fall apart. But you told me it was enough, that I had done enough, and it was all right to rest." No one had ever said that to me before. Samuel pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You deserved rest. You deserved so much more than Garrett was giving you. I know that now, but I did not know it then. I thought that was all I could expect from life, to work until I dropped and hope it was enough to survive another day. You showed me there was more. You showed me I deserved kindness and respect and love. You changed everything for me, Samuel. You changed everything for me too. Before I met you, I was just drifting. Now I have a purpose. I have a family. I have a life worth living." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and Samuel thought about the strange chain of events that had brought them to this moment. If he had not forgotten his rifle, if he had not come back at midnight, if he had ignored the woman scrubbing the floor instead of stopping to help. So many small choices that had led to this, a life full of love and meaning and the everyday miracles of family. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. The twins grew into lively, curious girls who kept everyone on their toes. Thomas became a serious boy who loved books and learning, though he also inherited his father's skill with horses. Miranda married a railroad engineer named David Michaels when she was 23, and they had a daughter they named Faye after her aunt. The boarding house evolved with the changing times. The railroad brought more travelers, and Truth or Consequences grew from a rough frontier town into a more settled community. Samuel and Faye expanded the business, buying the building next door and adding 10 more rooms. They hired more staff and trained them carefully, always insisting that every guest be treated with respect and kindness. Some of their earliest boarders became lifelong friends. They attended weddings and christenings, celebrated successes and mourned losses. The boarding house became more than just a business. It became a hub of community life, a place where people gathered and connected. When Thomas turned 16, he announced he wanted to study law and maybe go into politics. Samuel was surprised but supportive, proud that his son had ambitions beyond the life Samuel himself had lived. The twins wanted to go to college, a shocking idea for girls in the 1890s, but one that Samuel and Faye supported wholeheartedly. "Our children are going to have opportunities we never did," Faye said firmly. "That is the whole point of everything we have built. On a warm evening in June of 1895, Samuel and Faye sat on the front porch of the boarding house watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was home from his first year of law school, entertaining his younger sisters with dramatic retellings of his cases. Miranda and her family were coming to dinner, and the kitchen smelled of roasting meat and fresh bread. "Can you believe it has been 10 years since we got married?" Faye asked. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I know what you mean. I have a hard time remembering what my life was like before you." "Do you ever think about that night?" Faye asked. "The night we met, all the time." "I think about finding you on your hands and knees, scrubbing that floor like your life depended on it. I think about how close I came to just grabbing my rifle and leaving without saying anything. It scares me sometimes, how easily we might have missed each other. But we did not miss each other. You stopped and you spoke to me, and you offered help even though you had no reason to care about a stranger scrubbing a saloon floor at midnight. I had every reason to care. You were in pain and in danger, and I could do something about it. How could I not care?" Faye leaned her head on his shoulder. "There are plenty of people who would have walked away, who would have told themselves it was not their problem or that you probably deserved whatever you were going through. But you did not walk away. You stayed and you helped and you changed my entire life." "You changed mine too," Samuel reminded her. "I was empty before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave me something to care about, something to work for. You made me want to be better than I was." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The children's laughter drifted across the yard, and from inside the boarding house came the sounds of their staff preparing for the evening meal. This was their life, full and rich and sometimes chaotic, but always full of love. "I am proud of us," Faye said suddenly. "Proud of what we have built together. This boarding house, our family, the life we have made. We started with nothing but determination and hope, and look what we have created." "We created it together," Samuel said. "That is what makes it special. Every decision, every challenge, every triumph, we faced it as partners." "That is what I love most about our marriage," Faye said. "You have never treated me as less than your equal. You have never tried to control me or tell me what to do. You respect my opinions and my abilities, and you have always supported my dreams. That is what partnership means. We are stronger together than either of us could be alone." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Samuel thought about all the years they had shared and all the years still to come. They would face challenges. He knew illness, loss, the inevitable difficulties that came with life. But they would face them together the way they had faced everything else. The twins ran up onto the porch, breathless and laughing. "Mama, Papa, Thomas says we can go riding tomorrow if you say it is all right. Can we, please?" Faye smiled at her daughters. "If you finish your chores first and promise to stay where Thomas can see you, then yes, you may go riding." The girls cheered and ran back to share the good news with their brother. Samuel watched them go, these children he had helped create, and felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. "They are good kids," he said. "They are. We are lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. We worked hard to give them a good life and to raise them right. That was not luck, that was choice." "You are right," Faye said. "We made good choices. Starting with that night when you chose to stop and help me instead of walking away." Samuel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Best choice I ever made." The years rolled on, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost friends to illness and old age. They saw the turn of the century, welcoming 1900 with a huge celebration at the boarding house. They became grandparents when Thomas married and had children of his own. The twins both went to college and came back with degrees and modern ideas that sometimes startled, but always interested Samuel and Faye. Through it all, the boarding house remained the center of their lives. It evolved with the times. They added indoor plumbing and electric lights, updated the kitchen with modern appliances, redecorated the rooms to match changing tastes. But the heart of it remained the same, a place where people were treated with kindness and respect, where strangers became friends, where everyone was welcome. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel arranged for the staff to handle everything so he and Faye could take a rare day off. They rode out to a spot by the river where they sometimes went when they wanted to be alone. Samuel had packed a picnic lunch, and they spent the afternoon sitting in the shade of the cottonwood trees, watching the water flow past. 20 years, Faye marveled. How did that happen? I still feel like the same person I was when we met, but everything else has changed so much. You are not the same person, Samuel said gently. That woman I met was frightened and exhausted and convinced she did not deserve anything better. You are strong now, confident. You know your worth. You taught me my worth. No, I just helped you see what was already there. The strength and the courage and the determination, those were always part of you. You just needed a chance to use them. Faye was quiet for a moment, thinking. Do you know what I am most grateful for? Not just that you saved me from Garrett, though I am grateful for that. I am grateful that you never tried to make me into someone I was not. You let me be myself, supported me in becoming the person I wanted to be. That is the greatest gift you could have given me. You did the same for me. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting. Before I met you, I was content to just drift through life. You gave me a reason to put down roots. They talked until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, sharing memories and dreams for the future. When they finally rode back to town, Samuel felt the same contentment he always felt in Faye's presence, a deep sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be. As they grew older, Samuel and Faye gradually turned over more of the boarding house operations to their children. Thomas, who had become a successful lawyer, managed the business side of things. The twins, Emily and Grace, both unmarried and fiercely independent, ran the day-to-day operations. Samuel and Faye remained involved but stepped back from the constant demands of running the establishment. They spent their later years traveling, seeing parts of the country they had never visited. They went to San Francisco and marveled at the size of the city. They visited New York and saw electric lights and automobiles and all the wonders of the modern age. But they always came back to truth or consequences, to the boarding house and the life they had built there. On a quiet evening in the autumn of 1915, when Samuel was 60 and Faye was 57, they sat together on the front porch of the boarding house, the same porch where they had shared so many evenings over the past 30 years. Samuel's hair was white now, and Faye's face bore the lines of a life well lived, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been when they met, young and hopeful and desperately in love. You have any regrets? Faye asked, a question she sometimes posed when she was in a reflective mood. None, Samuel said firmly. Not one. My life has been exactly what I wanted it to be because I got to share it with you. I was so scared that night, Faye said softly, when you first spoke to me. I thought you were going to hurt me or demand something I could not give. I had learned not to trust kindness because it always came with a price. And then you just helped me. No strings attached, no expectations. You saw someone who needed help and you provided it, and you kept providing it even when it meant turning your own life upside down. I have spent 30 years trying to figure out what made you do that, why you cared about a stranger in trouble. I told you why. You reminded me of my mother, and I had made a promise. No, Faye interrupted gently. That might have been part of it, but it was not the whole reason. I think you helped me because that is who you are. A man who sees injustice and cannot walk away from it. A man with a good heart and a strong moral compass. You helped me because you could not do anything else and still be true to yourself. Samuel thought about this. Maybe she was right. He had always acted according to his principles, even when it was inconvenient or costly. Helping Faye had been the most impulsive and reckless thing he had ever done, but it had also been the truest expression of who he was at his core. Whatever the reason, I am glad I did it, he said, because it led to this, to us, to the family we have built and the life we have shared. If I could go back and change anything, I would not. I would make the same choices all over again. So would I, Faye said, taking his hand. Every single one. They sat together as the evening deepened, watching the lights come on in the windows of truth or consequences. The town had grown and changed over the decades, but it was still home. This boarding house, this porch, this life they had built together, it was everything Samuel had never known he wanted. You remember, Faye said, that first morning after we met. When you brought me the medicine and the supplies, you said we would face the future together, as partners. I remember. That was a promise you made without really understanding what you were promising. We barely knew each other. We had no idea what the future would bring. But I kept that promise anyway. We faced everything together. You did keep it. Through 30 years of challenges and changes, through raising children and building a business, through good times and hard times, we faced it all together as partners. That is what I am most proud of, Samuel. Not the success of the boarding house or the family we raised, though I am proud of those things too. I am most proud that we kept faith with each other, that we honored the partnership we created that very first day. Samuel raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You were my partner from the moment I found you scrubbing that floor. I just did not know it yet. And you were my salvation, Faye said. My friend, my partner, my love. Everything good in my life came from that moment when you walked through the door and told me to rest. You changed my entire world with those simple words. We changed each other's worlds. That is what love does, it transforms everything. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel pulled Faye close and they sat together in companionable silence. Around them, the boarding house bustled with life guests coming and going, staff preparing for the evening meal, their grandchildren playing in the rooms upstairs. This was their legacy, built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. Samuel thought about that midnight encounter so many years ago, when he had found a desperate woman destroying herself for a cruel employer. He thought about the choice he had made in that moment to speak instead of walking away, to help instead of ignoring the problem. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, just a few words of kindness to someone who needed them, but those few words had changed everything. They had saved Faye from a situation that might have killed her. They had given Samuel a purpose and a family. They had created this life, this home, this enduring partnership. All from one moment of compassion, one decision to see another person's pain and do something about it. Thank you, Faye whispered, as if reading his thoughts. For what? For seeing me that night. For caring when you had no reason to care. For giving me a chance to become the person I was always meant to be. Thank you for taking that chance, for trusting me even when you had no reason to trust, for building this life with me. They sat together as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other at the exact moment they both needed to be found. The boarding house glowed with light and warmth, a beacon in the darkness. A testament to what could be built when two people committed to facing life together. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of the night, Samuel heard an echo of his younger self saying those fateful words. It is clean enough. Come get some rest. Simple words that had become the foundation of everything that mattered. Words that had offered not just rest but hope, not just kindness but transformation. He had offered Faye rest that midnight so long ago, but what she had given him in return was so much more a reason to live fully, to love completely, to build something meaningful. She had taken the hand he extended and pulled him into a life richer and fuller than anything he could have imagined. That was the magic of love, Samuel thought. It multiplied everything. One small act of kindness had grown into 3 decades of partnership. One moment of compassion had blossomed into a family and a business and a legacy. One choice to stop and help had transformed 2 lonely, hurting people into a united force that had built something beautiful and lasting. As they finally rose to go inside, Samuel took one last look at the stars wheeling overhead, the same stars that had shone on that midnight encounter, the same sky that had witnessed the beginning of their story. He felt profound gratitude for every choice that had led him to this moment, to this woman, to this life. Faye squeezed his hand as they walked inside together, and Samuel knew that whatever time they had left, years or decades, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else. Together, as partners, bound by a love that had started with the simplest of gestures and grown into something that would endure long after they were gone. The boarding house settled into night around them, full of life and light, and the echoes of all the years they had shared. And Samuel Ashford, who had once been a drifter with no home and no purpose, walked through his house hand in hand with his wife, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built, and knew that he was the luckiest man who had ever lived. Because he had found her scrubbing floors at midnight, and instead of walking away, he had spoken. Instead of ignoring her pain, he had offered help. Instead of staying alone, he had reached out his hand. And Faye had taken that hand, and together they had built a life more beautiful than either of them could have dreamed. That was the story they would tell their grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the years to come, not just a love story, though it was certainly that, but a story about the power of compassion and the importance of seeing each other's humanity. A story about how one small choice could change everything, how one moment of kindness could ripple outward through the years, creating waves of goodness that touched countless lives. And when Samuel finally closed his eyes for the last time many years later, surrounded by the family he loved and the woman who had been his partner through it all, his last thought was of that midnight encounter and the words that had changed both their lives forever. It is clean enough. Come get some rest. Words that had offered comfort to a desperate woman. Words that had begun a love story. Words that had built a legacy. Perfect words, spoken at exactly the right moment, to exactly the right person. And everything that came after, all the love and joy and family and purpose, had grown from those simple words, like a mighty oak growing from a single acorn. That was their story, and it was perfect.